These are, on page 99, it's just basically things that you can do to help prevent job burnout yourself.
Yes.
Getting out of the office, big one. I love Rob, I love Calder, but I don't see him every day, you know? When you're in an office with people every day, you gotta get out of the office. Not just because it's your job to get out of the office and meet with people, sometimes you just need to get out of the office. So if you're getting frustrated or tired or burned out or whatever, get out of the office. Go see one of your favorite donors. It'll make you feel better. 10 workshops, that's what you're doing, that's great. Do you have that in your budget for education?
Good.
Spend time with your consumers, which would be the patients or the kids or the students or whatever, to help remind you why you're doing what you do. It's great spending time with donors because that's also heartwarming, but to see the results of why you're doing what you do, I mean, that's, you know, that's bound to give you another boost to keep going and keep moving. Recognize your successes, but also recognize your shortcomings or your failures. Think of what you can do better next time. You gotta. I said this at the very beginning of the seminar. You gotta screw up a few times to learn what works, and that's okay. Just don't forget, when you learn what works, don't go backwards. Go forward. It's okay to ask for help. You can ask us. Even if you're not clients, you can ask us. If we can't help, we'll suggest something. But get excited again. Make sure you're rejuvenated and ready to go. And if you get burned out and you're not excited, it's going to show. Your donors will see it. You know, your peers will see it, and it's contagious. Toxic.
I've mentioned that fundraising in our world is just inexhaustible. There's something I'm learning all the time. And there was a point where, deep into my career, I was asking myself questions that I was shocked that I didn't know the answers to. And so a lot of that had to do with legal and accounting basics. So I kind of just put answers to my own self-identified questions in this section. And I will give credit to Don Farmer. I think he's Don, he just sent me an email. Don Farmer. He's an attorney out of Philadelphia, and so he is an attorney who's an expert in nonprofits, not necessarily tax-wise ways of giving, but just in nonprofits. And so I've gotten a lot of answers from his publication, so I reference him here. But I was wondering, what I hear these terms: nonprofit, 501c3. Are they interchangeable? Are they the same things? What gives? And then the more I dug, I found the answer. A nonprofit is a creation of the state. It's the state that designates you as a nonprofit. It'll grant you that status. A 501c3 is an IRS tax determination. And you can be a nonprofit and not be a 501c3. But if you are a 501c3, you're a nonprofit. There are other nonprofits out there called C3s, C4s, C5s, C6s. These are other nonprofits. But C3. But you do not have the IRS determination for a deduction. So I just found that something I wanted to find the answer to. Also, a charity A nonprofit can be a private foundation and a public charity, okay? And there are different kind of treatments. A lot of people will set up families with a lot of money will set up a private foundation, but that doesn't give public support. It's mainly the family that's feeding that entity. And there are some tax advantages, but they're not nearly as tax advantaged as public charities.
How about donor advised funds? Don't they, do the donors get the tax benefits even before they give the money out when they create a donor advised fund?
Yeah. When they throw the money to the donor, they get the deduction, and then there's some.
No, but I thought that, like, okay, if they set it up with the Methodist Foundation as a donor advised fund, do they get tax credits for just doing that, or does it not happen until they actually give the money away?
I think it's, it's kind of like you set up an endowment.
Okay.
You get the deduction for building the endowment, even though the endowment may not push out money till
That's
later.
what I
I
thought,
think
yeah.
that's the same dynamic
so, too.
at play.
As long as it's irrevocable, you can get
Yeah.
Immediate, okay.
Yeah. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a nonprofit? Limits personal liability. You may be tax exempt from federal income tax as a nonprofit, particularly those who are 501c3s. Entity may be exempt from state income tax, and may be exempt from sales tax and local real estate tax. And you may get a mailing bulk rate designation, which saves you money on the mailing. We note the difference between what it means to be tax exempt, an organization that does not have to pay taxes, versus a tax deductible, which means a donor can deduct. It's just good to know that the kind of fine-tuning definitions between these different terms. The disadvantages, although I wouldn't think it's a disadvantage, but you have excess revenues over expenses in a not-for-profit, a well-run one. But that excess revenue will go back into the nonprofit and to build and strengthen the mission of the organization. If it were for-profit, that extra profit would go to the stockholders. But it'll go right back into the charitable purpose. We have how to create a nonprofit. I don't want to get lost in that. You'd have some of the responsibilities of the nonprofit, which you have to file a 990 with the IRS, and you have to deliver on your missional purpose. So that's just some of the basics of Nonprofit 101.
And also quarterly reports.
Quarterly reports?
You have to send quarterly reports, and then at the year end, you have to send the annual report. Then you do your 990. And usually that's due 6 months later.
Now, are churches 501c3s?
Yes.
Okay.
Most churches.
A lot of times, churches will go ahead and define themselves and do the formalities of becoming a 501c3. But I think between separation of church and states, the little church in the Wildwood may not have to go through all the machinations of becoming a 501c3. It's just, you give to the church, you get a deduction. There's a little bit of, the IRS has kind of delinked itself from, a lot of the religious churches and things. All right, now these are some of my questions. Is a charitable pledge legally enforceable? If you make a pledge somebody makes a pledge to you, is that legally binding?
Nope.
It's what?
I don't think so.
It is.
It is?
Yeah. It is legally
How
binding.
come agencies write them off then?
Because they want to continue getting donations. And this is kind of interesting. If you make a pledge, that the accountants will book it as an asset of the organization. Okay. Now, if there are financial difficulties and your well-intended donor who was going to make the pledge and pay the pledge bumps into some real financial difficulties, they can be released, you know, from that obligation, and of course, the nonprofit loses that asset value that the pledge, you know, renders. Okay. All right. But here's the thing. A board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the assets of the organization. And a board cannot become too cavalier about releasing these pledge commitments when they are in fact assets of the organization. So you have to be very sensitive about, you know, the donor. Is the donor being flippant, cavalier, or just having a real life, you know, issue things? There is a textbook case of where, I think it was out in California, this Daddy Warbucks died. The Daddy Warbucks had made a pledge to a state university, big pledge, and he died, and trophy wife did not want to pay the pledge. Okay. And
The
so
money went to charity, that was his girlfriend.
but anyway, the university sued, and the university won, and the case pivoted on something called detrimental reliance. That the university took that pledge, it was like $100 million. And they took that you know, that pledge of $100 million to the bank, so to speak, and they based a loan to build a building on that $100 million. And so there was detrimental reliance on the payment of that pledge, and so the court ruled in favor of the university to say, okay, it was a pledge, it was legally binding, there was detrimental reliance, and the estate is responsible for paying the pledge. If the donor dies without fulfilling the pledge, oh, that's great, filing 109. The pledge is also enforceable against the donor's estate, but the charity must assert a claim against the estate. In order to protect the charity's interest in case the donor were to die, the following phrase can be added to the pledge agreement. I direct my executor to honor my unpaid charitable pledges made during my lifetime, whether legally enforceable or not. Let's just say your organization gets a big pledge, and you know you need to use that to, say, build a building. You can go ahead and ask the donor to leave such language.
And we did that in Centersville, Georgia, when we were doing it. I was doing a campaign there years ago, because, you know, there was a situation that the donor was concerned about with a family member. I know it's a long story, but they did that.
Yeah. That language.
That language.
Yeah.
We do that with every pledge of any size. It's part of our standard form.
There you go.
There you go.
Is a charity required to sue a donor for an unfulfilled pledge? They're not required to. They do have discretion, and it may be the better part of valor just to say, I understand you're going through a hard time, and we know you love us, and if things turn around, we can count on you. But anyway, let's look at some of the things here. The following are factors that a board should consider when deciding whether or not to enforce a pledge. Is the pledge in writing? Are the terms clear? Does the donor have the ability to fulfill the pledge? That's a big one. Does the donor have legitimate counterclaims? Does the amount likely to be recovered justify the expense? Would enforcement damage relationship with other donors? Now that is the big one. because you're gonna kind of wig out a bunch of people if donors hear that, you know, the organization is suing, you know, a donor. Because they're gonna assume that donor is as well as intended as they are when they make a pledge. A decision by the board not to enforce the pledge should be carefully documented in the board's minutes or in a resolution. Charity does decide to enforce the pledge, the case will be treated more or less like an ordinary breach of contract action. Okay.
Another thing I want to mention too about when somebody dies, and then you have the family to deal with, that's another reason to keep good blood with that family members, not just that one donor. Maybe not necessarily, you know, asking them for money, but keep them on your happy side.
Oh, okay. Now the accountants may have say that after a certain amount of time, we will, you know, we're
Start
going
our write-off policy
to write it off. But that's kind of an accounting function that there are some general accounting, you know, legitimate things that you write it off. It's kind of like a bank loan. It's called bad debt expense, and so there's a normal amount of that.
Because you're
But
saying
you still
need to go through your board.
yeah, for a big pledge, I would, you know.
And the rationale behind that is when that auditor comes in on his annual audit and you've written off a debt, they're gonna look in the minutes to make sure the board approved that.
Yeah. I mean, who's to say you don't have a family member that made a big pledge and they're like, hey, I don't really want to do that. I mean, you know,
Our
not
auditors have
true.
never looked in the minutes for written off pledges though.
Well, they will next time.
Well, they may, you know.
Each auditor
They
may
ask
be-
us for our write-offs. We
Yeah,
don't have that many.
yeah.
We only have one or two.
Yeah. And I think on the write-offs, you can, you know, accountants, no red flags happen,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
If there's red flags, that may be
If it's
what
de
they're-
minimis,
Okay.
but if it's, you know, if it's getting to encroach on the asset value of your organization, that's what kind of
Okay.
trips the flag.
I may need to go back and take some write-offs to a finance committee meeting or some board committee at some
Well,
point.
by definition, if you've already written them off, that may, you know, you may have some, maybe hard to go back. Yeah. I mean,
You
if
may
if it's a
cover
huge pledge and you know you're gonna take it to the
They need to
bank,
know it's serious.
so to speak,
Yeah.
you may wanna,
You may have a life situation that comes up and the donor needs to recalculate or recalibrate what they originally, they said, we're gonna give you 50,000, they come back and they can only do 5,000, I mean, that, because of the debt or something, you know.
You know, but sometimes too, if that happens, can they postpone the rest of their pledge and then maybe pick it up or stretch it out, pay less each? There's ways to not just write it off
Yeah.
first. I think
Yeah.
writing it off might
can
be,
grant some latitude.
yeah. It might be, get creative before you just decide.
Yeah,